Okay, so our project is called Money Manager. It's a web application to help users add in their finances, their income, their expenses, and will help them keep track visually of their monthly expenses and what they've got left of their monthly budget. So on the dashboard of our page, we've got an income form and an expenses form. We can come through and we can add an income.
You could say
Oh yeah.
tenant rent, like if you own a property.
Yeah, okay. Tenant rent, 50, we say do every 30 days, and probably the next payout is going to be the first of next month. And then maybe address it's for, submit, and then tenant rent, pay 650 every 30 days. We've got a couple other income sources that have already been added here, and it automatically updates over here on the total income and the graph. And then we can add an expense here. Say that that is due on the 20th. And say it's an optional income, and then that'll appear down here on an additional card as well. And we'll update over here on the income and expenses. We'll update on the graph, so it'll be a visual update as well. And then we've got our all income page that'll show all of these with a little bit more information. It'll give the next deposit date and any notes that you may have added to it. Same for the expenses. If you have any notes, then they'll come in here and it'll have the category.
Say the edit page here is a simple CRUD update, so you can change any previous installments of income. So you can change the amounts, the frequency in days, which will affect the overall total that you would get monthly. The ID will stay the same and be the same row. So overall, just seamless change.
And so now you can view the income also in the JSON feed. The same thing for the expense feed. And then here's the database with the new entry for the tenant rent, and the same for the expenses and the internet bill. And then we can also go back in and say we want to delete one, and delete the entry. It's gone instantly. And now it's gone from the database as well.
So we can show that this is where it's creating an expense and income. It is adding them to the attributes so it can populate in the form data and also go through the intervals of the time leaf for loops for the list that we'll be adding later on. If you go down, that's where the database will be collecting all of the previous inserted expenses of incomes and will be inserted as a list. So as I mentioned earlier, it can be an iterable function. It is collecting the averages from a method that we created in a service, and also secondary function to add the total through the payments for every 7 days or so. And then that is being all added to the attributes as well. And then it will return to the index page.
I'll just run through the debug so we can watch it happen. So now it's got the list of incomes here that's collected, list of expenses, the average, which is pulling from service class, income total, expense total.
I'll say because returning all incomes and all expenses is essentially very similar to the index page. Yeah, so all the CRUD methods, so like adding, it is just calling the income service, which is a part of the service layer, which as we know is going to the DTO, but it's just calling it and then saving that. And instead of returning a page, it is redirecting to the index page. So we don't need to consistently repopulate all the data that would be required to use the index page. So most of our returns are either going to be the index page or a redirect to the index page. Here is how we are actually returning the object to delete or update. It is a link to controller to one of the routes, so or the endpoints, which this endpoint is delete. It will set the ID, the get variable for the ID to expense ID, and we're return our own custom variable of expense. So we didn't have to create two delete endpoints. We are just creating one delete endpoint and then passing an expense or income variable, and then it'll know which to delete thereon.
Okay, and then we also have our service layer. The service layer is where we're getting the calculated average income. So we're taking the frequency and the amount. We're dividing the amount by the frequency and multiplying it by this number, which is 365 divided by 12, taking the monthly average and then rounding it so that it's not giving us a long decimal point and returning that number. We can set breakpoints for these for the save, list all, things that we can walk through just to let it walk through. Here it's gone out and collected the income from the income repository. See all the income sources. Okay, so in the income service, this one is in the income service. It's collecting the list from the DAO. It's returning the total. Okay, now we're past our breakpoint. So now if we were to add something here, like what do we have? Water bill, then that should also hit a breakpoint. In the list expenses, DAO, it's going to go through and collect all of the DAOs. It's going to go through and collect all of the expenses, which collect the total. Turn that back out. That's the total here. Income total, expense total, average income, overall total is average income minus expense total, and return to index. The expense total is now 730. So we did add the cacheable so it doesn't have to ping the database every time to pull the expenses or the income. So both of these are caching the income and expenses for the save, for the get by ID, and for the delete, it is then doing the cache evict on both services. The DTO for expense.
It's a
Oh,
data class, so it knows to.
we do currently have tests that are partially passing. So we have a few items that are not passing on our test. And during my testing, it is not passing because these are traveling through the SQL DAO. So it's actually generating an additional entry for these. As you can see that it creates an additional entry for these. The phone bill and this employment just got added just from me running the test. And it's actually ignoring the fact that there is test profile on the income DAO and the expense DAO, as well as a development profile on the income and expense SQL DAOs. And in addition to that, we have the application properties specifying dev only and a blank application test properties. So the profile is not working appropriately. If I change any one of these, then all the tests fail. So it's working partially, but not completely. But for the most part, these tests are working. And we did use these to create our functions at the beginning as test-driven design, and they were originally working at that point. We do have our side nav is being used as a fragment, as well as our footer is being used as a fragment. So we're able to pull that in on the index page as side nav and the footer, as well as all of our other pages without having to repeat all this information. And then when we need to update a link here for additional pages, we only need to update it in one place and it reflects across all the pages.